Hi guys, today I will finally bring a drawing of one of my favorite characters from Arcane, Heimerdinger. As you've seen, I have titled the video how to draw Heimerdinger with markers, but it won't be a real step-by-step tutorial because I don't think I have the knowledge or the skills to teach others properly. I just want to give you some hints in case you want to draw Arcane characters with markers, by showing you my approach. The idea behind this video is that Arcane has a very well defined and iconic art style, and I think that for many is very difficult to replicate it, especially if you don't paint with acrylics, oil tempera or use a graphic tablet. At the same time, markers are a very popular tool, almost everyone uses them, so it's interesting to try to draw an Arcane character with this tool. If you want, you can also slow down the video further to draw along with me. For this reason, I reduced the speed of the time-lapse compared to my usual videos. And now, without further ado, let's start. While I draw, I will tell you a little bit about my process, and at the same time I would like to talk a little bit about Arcane. Arcane has quickly become one of my favorite series ever, and I know my words are heavy, but I'm going to jump in. One of the best animation products in history. It is one of those products that when you see it you say, "Oh, I've been waiting for a series exactly like this." It has everything I ask from an animated series. The basic idea of the story is the war between the lower part of the city, Zone, which lives in poverty and decay, and the upper part, Piltover, which is rich and prosperous. Nothing exceptionally original so far, but then the story unfolds between the characters in an intriguing and perfectly narrated manner. The characters in Arcane are simply written to perfection. Each faction fights for an ideal and each character has his own consistent motivations. Every character is deeply involved in the plot, everyone's stories are intertwined, and the whole thing feels like an organic creature evolving episode after episode. Each component is important and contributes to the final result. The character design is incredible. Each character is well cared for and interesting both physically and psychologically. In fact, it's really hard to choose a favorite character. Heimerdinger is definitely one of my favorites. At this point the sketch is finished, so it's time to move on to inking. Let's ink! About the inking, I decided to be very light. I usually use a lot of black and add a lot of detail, but this time the focus will be on the coloring, so I use fine tip pens 01 to 03 and add very light texture details just to guide the coloring later, especially for the fur. I'm also doing this because in the Arcane style there is no line art, it's all painted, and even though this drawing is not meant to be in that exact style, I don't want to deviate too much and make it more comic style. Let's go back for a second to Heimerdinger and why I chose to draw him. Heimerdinger is definitely one of my favorite characters in Arcane. I've loved his design ever since I played LoL. Honestly, I've never been a big fan of League of Legends. I've only played 2 weeks with my brother because a friend of ours plays it a lot and pushed us to try it, but I wasn't really into the gameplay. I was more interested in the character designs, which are awesome. My favorites even then were Heimerdinger and Blitzcrank, so when I watched the series I was already biased towards Heimerdinger and I really wanted to draw him. Besides, as you may already know, I am taking my master's degree in astrophysics and I have a soft spot for scientist characters, especially if they are genius as he is. Okay, now it's time to put some colors. I start with the fur hair, which is the trickiest part. First, I put a base layer with a very light yellow, leaving a few light spots that I need later to know which spots to avoid with darker colors. In the artistic style of Arcane, the colors are almost always separated quite clearly. There are a few continuous gradients. It is especially noticeable in the faces, where there is a clear distinction between light and dark areas. The contrast is sharp, you can see the brush strokes. I exaggerate a bit here, but it is as if they put one layer of acrylic color next to the other without blending. The face is divided into planes and each one has a different gradation depending on the light hitting it. To get at least a little closer to this effect, it is important here to use different shades of yellow that are not too similar. There must be a break between one color and the next, otherwise it is a continuous gradient and we don't want that. For this reason, now I switch to this orange-ish yellow, which is the main color for this part, and therefore I cover almost all the spaces except for the light spots I left before. I also start paying more attention to the flow of the hair strands so that it is continuous and as natural as possible. I use a total of 5 different shades for the hair, from the lightest yellow to dark orange, almost brown for the darkest parts. After finishing with the darkest shade, I again pass on the second yellow, the main color, to make everything a little more homogeneous and not leave white holes. Okay, now I start coloring the white part of the face, so the mustache and the eyebrows. Here you have to be careful because, being white, these parts have to be defined through shadows, which are darker, and it is not easy to avoid them looking too white or too colored. I use a light grey to define the shadow areas, and then a light pink to give a warmer tone to the color. The idea of using different tones layer by layer also applies to the subsequent parts, so while you see the process, I will come back to talk a little bit about Arcane. I've heard several people complain about the second season compared to the first, but I honestly love them both. Certainly, the narrative is more linear and organized in the first, but the second was a roller coaster of events and emotions, and in the end I couldn't wait for the next episode to come out. The story gets more complicated and there are definitely a lot of things happening at once, maybe too many, but this certainly didn't stop me from watching the series with transport and appreciating each episode. Moreover, after the first season the standard was very high and it is always difficult to maintain the level of the first one, which also counts on the surprise effect being the first chapter of the series. I can say for sure that I enjoyed the two seasons equally, and I am indeed happy that they did not ruin the series with a bad second season, as often happens. So props to Fortiche Production for their work. I can't wait to see what they come up with in the future. By the way, it is amazing how much the studio has grown between the first and the second season. Fortiche Production started working on Arcane with just a few people, and at the peak of the second season there were more than 450 people working between the US and France. That's crazy honestly, but also understandable given the success of the series. Super well deserved success, by the way. Their art style mixing 3D models and 2D coloring has already become iconic. I know it's a bold comparison, but to me it's a bit like Studio Ghibli. When you see a Ghibli film, especially by Miyazaki, you recognize it immediately after one frame. The style is so iconic and distinctive that one glance is enough to know what it is. For Arcane, in my opinion, it is a bit the same thing. At a time full of rather stylistically similar animation products, it was really a breath of fresh air. Now I finally finished Heimerdinger's head. I started coloring this one without doing the body line art first, because I thought it looked nice as a sticker and a keychain, and in fact I used this design to make exactly those two products. Let me show you. Here you can see the stickers, here we have the keychains, and to be honest I really like these ones, they are well polished and pretty solid. And as you can see, I have already put one of the Heimerdinger stickers on the sketchbook. Okay, back to the drawing. For the body, the uniform, I would like to do something similar to what I did for this drawing of Okarun from Dan Dan Dan. Obviously, as first thing, I connect the sketch of the body to the head, since I have the photo of the head isolated to make the keychains and the stickers. Then, as I did for the previous parts, here too I start with the line art, very light, and then I pass several layers of color following the principle adopted for the head. This part is a bit trickier because there are more gradients and less sharp shadows. In fact, I changed my mind several times about which and how many areas to leave lighter. Finally, I decided to remain more faithful to the characters' images taken from the series frames I used as a reference, and therefore to make the color almost totally uniform by thickening only the darker areas on the sides a bit. While you are watching the coloring of the uniform, I would like to briefly remind you to like the video, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. These gestures don't cost you anything, but they are a great help to me in getting the video spreading as much as possible on the platform and allowing me to continue producing content. Thank you very much. I have finally finished this Heimerdinger portrait, and so all that remains is to move on to the background. The rough idea was to draw a pattern reminiscent of the Arcane. I didn't have a precise idea and I threw myself into it without thinking much. I experimented a bit and, in fact, I am not 100% convinced of the end result. In these cases, it is better to think a bit about what to do or go for a colored background simply with one color and some gradients. Simple but always effective. But art is also this. You have to experiment and let yourself go. Sometimes you don't have to think too much and just go for it, no matter if the end result is not the best possible. At least that's a bit of my approach. In the end, I used a mix of grey, light green and light blue for the background. I didn't want an intense color to distract too much from the figure. I then added a touch of color in the line art of the hollow shapes, so as not to make it too flat. From the video you can't see much, it all looks grey, but in person it looks different. After I had finished coloring, I went over the black outlines of the uniform again to outline the contours better and also added some etching to give depth. Finally, I also added a little white with a gel pen to make the highlights stand out a bit more and make the shapes look better. At this point, there is only one thing left to do. Okay guys, I've finished the drawing, so let's take a look at the final result. As always, if you have followed me this far, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking a small part of your day to watch my videos, and I hope you enjoyed both the video and the drawing. Don't forget to comment on the drawing, on Arcane, or what you think in general about the video, and please leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. See you next time guys.
Goodbye.